Happy Saturday. So today, Dr. Caroline Richter is coming from us, the University of Alabama at Birmingham. She is an assistant professor and really an expert on the lived experiences of neurodiverse youth as they navigate social and educational environments. She's interested in understanding how cognitive and social emotional aspects contribute to adaptive outcomes, academic achievement, and really emotional well-being and good life for neurodiverse children. So she collaborates with local schools in Birmingham and school leaders and teachers and parents. Today she's going to be talking to us really about how to understand neurodiverse kids and how to embrace diversity. Again, it's really the norm and not the exception, and giving us that better insight so we can better support youth that we work with. So without further ado, please give a warm CNI welcome to Dr. Caroline Richter. I do this. This is how I clap.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. Oh, I guess I haven't shared yet. Okay, now I can share. Uh, Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I'm so excited. This is the third year, so feeling very honored and very excited. Um, and this time I was able to modify and add some new things. So um, please do ask questions. I can see some of you, not all of you, but I'm able to monitor the chat. So I do want this to be as interactive as possible. We'll have some polls to do. And this time, actually, when we start the poll, you see there also a place for Q&A. So you can ask questions either in Slido when it comes or here on the Zoom. But thank you again, Marlon, for having me here today. I really appreciate it. As you mentioned, today I will be talking about neurodiversity in youth with a focus on learning, support, and inclusion. And the goal of the talk today is to kind of move beyond diagnostic labels and focus on how learning environments also interact with individual differences to shape academic, emotional, and developmental outcomes. Um, okay, this is just a huge shout out to my lab. So my lab at UAB, University of Alabama at Birmingham, is Science of Child Development and Neurodiversity Lab. And a lot of what I'm presenting today comes from my wonderful students. I wouldn't be able to do anything without them. Um, and in my lab, as Marlon mentioned, I work with kids with various neurodevelopmental disorders. And last time I was able to connect with somebody that had a specific interest. So I want to mention briefly that I work with kids with Williams syndrome, Down syndrome, and specific learning disabilities. And of course, ADHD is co-occurring with all of those conditions. So I'm happy to talk further about those if folks are interested. This is the outline of my presentation today. So I start by defining neurodiversity and reviewing some relevant research on that area. Then I'll discuss the social model of disability, stigma and resilience, and also the role of student-teacher relationships. And then finally, I will focus on some concrete strategies for creating inclusive learning environments. So we are going to go ahead and get started with Slido. So I really think you guys have the knowledge. So I want to hear from you. Um, if you could tell me what is neurodiversity for you, and you can just write a couple of words. It should be working. Let me know if it's not. Um, so what is it for you? And I see two of you typing, which means that it is working. So different functioning brain. I'm sorry, I'm gonna try and move so you guys can see the responses. Okay, you guys can see it, right? Natural differences in brain function, different functioning brain, people, different way, um, different normal differences in brain wiring, emoting difference, experiencing variety. That's amazing. Thinking outside the box. These are all wonderful. Okay, you guys can continue to do it, but thank you so much. And we'll have a few more of these. Uh, okay, so this time I wanted to bring almost while you guys are still responding to your Slido, I wanted to pause before my talk to have you all bring to mind a specific student or a youth who you know is neurodivergent or who might be struggling. And as you see, when we talk about neurodivergency, it can even be mood disorders, or anxiety, depression. And as we move through the talk today, I want you to continuously try to apply each concept we discussed to that individual or a group of individuals. And hopefully this will help keep our discussion more concrete and practical. So to ground us, I'll introduce one case, very general. And this is not meant to be representative of all neurodivergent youth, but just to serve as a shared reference point. So during the Q&A at the end of my talk today, I will invite you to revisit the case you thought in your mind or this one, so we can discuss how those frameworks and supports can apply to your specific context. So imagine a 12-year-old student who's academically capable, highly curious, and deeply interested in a narrow set of topics. In the classroom, however, the student struggles with transitions, experiences sensory overload, and is often interpreted as disengaged or oppositional. Teachers might describe the student as inconsistent, while the student reports feeling misunderstood and chronically stressed at school. So use this as a framework and get back to it at the end of the lecture. Okay. So what is neurodiversity? You all know a lot about it already, right? But the term was first used by Judith Singer in 1998, so pretty recent, kind of 25 years ago or so. She's an Australian sociologist on the autism spectrum. So she rejected the idea that people with autism are disabled. In her view, their brains just work differently from others. As you probably have been learning in this series about neuroscience, one of the first lessons that neuroscience teaches is that differences, particular differences in how we learn, are part of our diversity, and brain variations are very normal. So the term neurodiversity, which is neurological plus diversity, is the belief that neurological differences like autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, and many others are the results of normal natural variations in humans. And they're actually evolutionary, right? They stayed because they are very helpful to our evolution as a society and species. Okay, so this paper is not mine, but they say that in this ecological model, neurodiversity is going to be reflecting natural variation in cognitive and emotional functioning. And these differences likely evolve because groups benefit from having multiple ways of thinking and problem solving, right? So we know there is no single correct way of thinking or experiencing the world, and these differences are not inherently deficits. So as we'll see during the talk today, these challenges are typically going to arise in settings designed for typically developing individuals. Okay, so this is just an example. So all the disorders that are usually included in this DSM manual, which I should have the TR here, but anyways, they are usually extreme variations of what we see in the general population. So the DSM, starting from the fifth, really took that continuum perspective. So if we read a lot of those criteria, we say like, oh, I have this, I have this. But you might not have the extreme that characterizes, or you might not have a combination of a lot of symptoms that they describe. So what we do to give a label, we really use arbitrary cutoff points because all of our characteristics or traits are going to be kind of normally distributed like this. curve shows. Um, so we usually use an arbitrary cut point based on that criteria, in particular for the challenges the individual might face. So here, for example, in dyslexia, we can think about reading outcomes. Uh, and we usually say like, oh, all the kids below this particular, for example, below the 25th percentile, they might have the diagnosis. But very importantly, to think, let's say in the past, if we were to communicate with drawings rather than with writing letters or sounding out words. Um, so maybe that would be a different cutoff point, or maybe that wouldn't be as relevant for that society. So in my case, I'm a terrible artist. I draw really poorly. My visual spatial skills are not great. So I probably would be considered to have a disorder in that context. I'm okay. I'm good with words and sounding out words. So in this particular context that we are right now, I don't have a disorder in that case. But that's just to think about that, right? There is really a mismatch, or the environment is really dictating that disability, if you will. Uh, so now let's think about ADHD. So ADHD traits such as novelty seeking, exploration, and hyperfocus might have been an evolutionary benefit to our ancestors who had to move from place to place in search of new resources while being attentive to threats, or they needed to go hunting, really have a risky behavior to survive. So thinking about that, they might have been very adapted, right? But nowadays, the social environment for children is very different, right? Children are asked to sit still for long hours in in order to learn. So they might be considered to have a risky behavior or difficulty sitting still, which maybe in the past were actually very adaptive. So again, showing that mismatch between the strengths of children with ADHD and the environment, what the environment is asking from them. And this is coming from evolutionary perspectives on neurodevelopmental disorders. Um, Research also shows that, for example, ADHD traits can be associated with divergent thinking or creativity. And this is from a group from Connecticut, University of Connecticut. And what they saw is that in academic performance for college students in engineering, those that had more ADHD traits, so not necessarily the diagnosis, but the traits, they also had more divergent thinking or creativity. So I really like this visual from UC Davis Mind Institute, thinking about not the weaknesses necessarily, but what are some of the strengths, for example, for those who might have ADHD. So hyperfocus can be a very important strength, energetic, willing to take risks, creative, like this paper suggests, spontaneous, maybe a great sense of humor, sometimes very persistent and flexible or adaptable. Other studies found similar findings for autistic individuals. In this study, for example, researchers asked participants to build towers like this one. My pointer comes and goes. So towers like this one of spaghetti and Play-Doh. And they had 3 groups of 8 participants each. So it was a small scale study: autistic, non-autistic, and mixed. The non-autistic individuals were more likely to copy the designs of their peers, while autistic individuals and mixed groups, they were actually more likely to build novel towers. So this study is also showing how that neurological diversity can benefit groups. So if I think about myself, it would be very hard for me to create new designs in this case. I just showed you my visual spatial skills are not the best, right? So I would probably be copying others. Okay, so the ability to maintain focus on a specific interest. Like I told you, that hyper focus can actually be a real strength and can lead people with autism to auto perform a lot of their neurologically typical ones, for example. These strengths can sometimes be overlooked, but of course, if they are fostered and nurtured, can lead to amazing kind of career paths. And they can be very, very important for the society. So here we just have a few examples. It's really cool because yesterday, actually, I was at the Alabama Autism Conference, and we had a great self-advocate. So an autistic adult, and his mom were giving a talk, and he has a PhD in engineering, and he's amazing in that particular skill. And he was telling us about his story. And a lot of what they talked about is exactly this mismatch and how they were able to really focus on the strengths he had, and the environment was able to be very supportive for his growth. So he has a PhD from Georgia Tech. But here we have a couple of other successful examples. So Temple Grandin is a professor at Colorado State University. She's autistic and an animal scientist. There are movies about her, books, and she designed a widely used livestock handling system to reduce animal suffering. She's considered an autistic savant, meaning that she has unusual cognitive abilities, such as photographic memory and excellent spatial skills. So she says she thinks in pictures, which helps her understand what animals perceive. So there are some studies looking at Temple Grandin's brain, and here you see her enlarged left ventricle is a sign of abnormalities in her left hemisphere, which typically handles language and may account for the difficulties she has with processing words. But to make up for this, the right hemisphere sometimes overcompensates, which can lead to special abilities in music, art, or visual memory. Another example here out of many includes the autistic savant Stephen. Stephen is an artist who draws and paints detailed cityscapes, and he has a particular talent for drawing lifelike, accurate representations of cities, sometimes after having only observed them briefly. So, of course, as most of the rates, there is a variation in the studies, but on average, there is approximately 1 in 10 people who have autism will also have some savant skills or be really good at something. Okay, so now let's look at the social model of disability in neurodiversity paradigm. So very important for this context is the social model of disability that frames disability as this mismatch between the individual and their environment. So again, disability is not going to be inherited to the person. It will emerge when environments fail to accommodate differences. And that's going to be contrasting with the medical model, which assumes deficits that must be cured. Actually, this man yesterday who was autistic, he actually said that in his talk, like, I don't have anything that needs to be fixed or cured. I just might need different types of support. So again, the interaction between functional limitations or impairments and physical and social barriers, these are the ones that create disabling environments. So a person is disabled not by an impairment based on this social model of disability, but by barriers in their social and physical context. So in my talk today and in my lab, we use the neurodiversity paradigm. So I really like this picture. It's not from any of my papers, but from Sunuga Bark's group. So this figure contrasts two ways of understanding neurodevelopmental conditions: the disorder paradigm, which is used by the DSM that I showed you, or the neurodiversity paradigm. So here, the starting point is a brain dysfunction. So the atypical brain is framed as impaired, and the neurodevelopmental condition itself, it's located within the individual. And because we assume that impairment originates in the brain, the translational goal of intervention is to fix or normalize this dysfunction by reducing symptoms or alleviating impairment. So the intervention primarily is deficit focused in directly towards the individual. On the right here on the neurodiversity paradigm, by contrast, the brain, oops, this up. My laser disappeared again. The brain is atypical or diverse, not dysfunctional. So there are differences in thinking, doing, and being are treated as natural variations rather than errors. So outcomes such as well-being, acceptance, resilience, and sense of agency are shown as emerging from interactions between the individual and their context, not solely by the brain itself. So in the model, interventions still exist, but the purpose of the intervention changes. So as this individual yesterday said, it's not to fix me, but to fix to use the ways I interact with the environment differently, right? So it's gonna be more in that relationship instead of just him. So instead of targeting the brain to reduce the difference, interventions aim to create affirmative experiences, reduce environmental barriers, and support thriving. So again, the focus changed from how do we change the person to how do we change the context. So different minds can function well. Okay. So there are valid critiques of the neurodiversity paradigm. Um, so acknowledging autism as a natural variation does not mean that support is unnecessary, right? We do live in a society, and we do interact with each other. So autism can be considered both a natural variation, autism and other neurodivergencies, and an impairment. So the goal here, it's not to say they don't need support, right? Or that society doesn't need support to better uh, adapt to them, right? So the goal is acceptance and respect for autistic people or neurodivergent people as valuable members of the society, and also fight for appropriate support and services to meet the needs. So the goal is acceptance and support alongside appropriate ways to improve their quality of life and in what matters for them. So yesterday also at this conference, we had a lot of talks on neurodiversity informed care and values, right? So what is important for that particular individual? What are their needs? And that might differ a lot across individuals. So again, there is that focus on the broader societal change and accommodations. Even though we do know the brain is working differently, the focus is not on the brain because we know we don't change the brain based on all the studies we have so far. And we also know it's not helpful, right? Because we need those different ways of thinking, and they can be very important for our society. So it can seem counterintuitive almost, right? Because we are in a neuroscience meeting, but it doesn't mean that there is a difference that we need to focus on that particular piece. So let's see if this is gonna work.
How to communicate with autistic people, a step-by-step guide to being direct. Step one.
Sorry, can you hear or no? Can you hear
You want to communicate and then verbalize.
Yep,
Here's an
we can
example.
hear it.
Okay, Melissa
Okay.
is exiting the door.
I wanted to pause just so I can give you a context first. So this is Caitlin Partlow, and she's an American autism advocate, therapist, author, public speaker, and content creator. She's best known for her appearance on Netflix, but she began working with Project Hope Foundation in 2015, and she's a registered behavior technician. After participating in their program as a student because she's autistic, but she has advanced to lead role, working with children and teens on the autism spectrum and helping develop staff training content. She uses her lived experiences and professional work to educate families, clinicians, and educators about autistic perspectives and inclusive practices. So in this video, she's gonna show like, what can we do differently, right? So what can neurotypicals do differently? Or what can we do as educators to better support neurodivergent students? What training do we need? So, we know individuals who are neurodiverse will many times receive supports or interventions. But how about educators in school? We also play a critical role in student success. So what can we do? What training do we need? What instructional practice can we adjust? What behaviors and expectations should we change? So she talks about one example of that.
She sees that Jay is standing in the way. She thinks of the message she needs to say. She verbalizes it, excuse me, but Jay doesn't move. After I verbalize my message and it didn't work, I go to step 2. Ask yourself, what do I really want to say? So she says, watch out, I'm trying to come through. Right, step 3. After 2 unsuccessful attempts, ask yourself, what does the person need to do with this information? So back to our example, Melissa finally asks herself, what do I want Jay to do with the information that I am giving him right now? So she says, take a few steps back, please. Jay, understanding what she wants him to do, takes a few steps back, allowing her to get through the door. Direct communication tells someone exactly what they should do with the information that you're giving them. This eliminates the guesswork, hidden intentions, and implications.
Yeah, so in this case, she's talking about communication that can be a struggle for neurodivergent individuals. So saying excuse me can mean 10 things, right? And that person in that scenario didn't understand excuse me or watch out. And I actually had this video was found by a student in my course, and she has a friend who's autistic, and she gave that example. They would say, watch out. Her friend would say, I'm watching, I'm looking. So, it was hard for her to understand because we use excuse me or watch out. We use a lot of other visual cues or emotional cues or social cues to understand what that means in that particular context. So instead of doing that, we can say, can you please take a few steps back? Or can you, and that might sound too direct sometimes, but it can be very helpful. Okay. Okay, so now let's move to a paper that we talk about stress and resilience factors. Our paper, we were talking directly on about individuals with specific learning disabilities, but it's very within the neurodiversity paradigm, and I think it applies more broadly to neurodiverse youth. So this is our paper, Stress Resilience and Emotional Being in Children and Adolescents with Specific Learning Disabilities. So, as we've been talking, if disability is created by this mismatch between the individual and their environment, the next question is, what does that mismatch do to the children over time? So the answer is consistently, unfortunately, stress. And whether that stress accumulates or is buffered depends on that resilient factors. So the model we put together based on the literature, this is a literature review, shows that stress and resilience are layered. So we have individual factors. So this is based on the Bronfenbrenner, since we are in the Bronfenbrenner Center model. So we have individual factors, family factors, school and community factors. So stress accumulates across contexts, but does so resilient factors. So no single intervention is sufficient and no single environment is responsible. So for example, children and adolescents with specific learning disabilities will experience chronic stress driven by, for example, stigma, labeling, peer victimization, lowered expectations by teachers or family members, not only based on test difficulty, based on their diagnosis, but these findings are not only based on self-report of stress. We also see in the literature neuroendocrine systems that are different, suggesting that prolonged exposure to stressors rather than that momentary frustration are going to be accumulating over time. So that stress load comes from what the students can't do, comes less from what they can't or cannot do, and more from how they are treated while learning, as you can see on the stress factors here. hopefully you can all read it. So challenges, carrying academic schools, families' expectations, viewing societal pressures of academic success, stigma, and then their diagnosis. And then notice here that most resilient factors are relational and contextual, meaning that schools are places, not just places where stress happens, but they are also places where stress can be reduced. So here we have self-esteem, self-concept, grit, self-efficacy at the individual level, and then family level, home environment, maternal coping skills, school level, peer mentorship, or even mentorship in general, student-teacher relationships, and then the neurodiversity paradigm that we talked a lot today already. So today I will focus on the two particular factors. I will focus on stigma and then student-teacher relationship. So looking at stigma, we have a systematic review and meta-analysis looking at stigma and stereotype threat for individuals with specific learning disability. So this is a very important stressor factor for this population and other neurodiverse youth. So stigma, we looked at stigma conscientiousness. This is again a lit review. But this stigma conscientiousness refers to the expectations of being judged or treated differently. So for students with learning disabilities or other neurodiverse youth, this can look like worrying about being seen as less capable or inferior. So those are some just questions from this questionnaire. People treat me differently because of my SOD. There's something wrong with me. I worry about feeling judged because of my learning disability, or most people think they're better than me. So they're gonna rate those questions. So over time, they can become more alert to those negative societal attitudes and may expect to be treated differently because of that stigma. So they internalize that stigma. So what we found from previous literature is that stigma conscientiousness among stigmatized groups, not only neurodiverse, not only individuals with learning disabilities, but other stigmatized groups as well, is linked to poor academic performance, lower sense of belonging, more anxiety, and poor mental health. And unfortunately, self-stigma can occur when those societal stereotypes are internalized. So you might see in your students, some of them believing statements like, I'm stupid, or I cannot read, or I will never learn like my friends. I'm terrible in math. They start to characterize themselves and view themselves like that, which we don't want, right? So in summary, in a context of societal stigma, individuals who are neurodiverse might be hyper aware of the stigma of that label, and they may eventually begin to endorse some of those beliefs. And this concern about confirming that stereotype may elevate anxiety, reduce cognitive resources, and impair achievement. So those might be things that they hear and then start to internalize. So what we found in our review is that greater stigma associated with learning disability was definitely associated with less optimal outcomes, in particular lower self-esteem. That was the only one we could do a meta-analysis for, because that's the only one we have enough literature, but also other papers suggesting greater anxiety and depression, lower academic performance, lower adaptive coping, self-efficacy, quality of life, and school belonging, and also stereotype threat associated with lower academic self-efficacy, persistence, and motivation. So we suggested that given the current literature, we also have different levels of intervention, like that original paper that I told you about. And there are some strategies we can do in all those different levels. So we can improve awareness, pride, group belonging, talking about our differences, opportunities to challenge negative beliefs, and creating environments that do not intentionally prime that stereotype or that stigma. So being really aware to create environments that do not unintentionally hinder their performance. And of course, you all being here is a great step. At home, families can emphasize children's strengths, but in the school as well, using positive affirmations, using cognitive reappraisal. So, for example, instead of saying I'm stupid or I'm bad at math, saying, oh, you missed this question, right? You couldn't do this question. Let's work on this question together that you missed so you can get better, right? It's not that you cannot do math or that you're stupid, but you need more support on this particular question, and we're going to work together so you can learn. And you missed this one, but you got these others right. And of course, teachers can also do that. And then community, giving examples of role models, increasing awareness in the media, movies, documentaries, and that neurodiversity paradigm shift. Okay, so how about student and teacher relationships? I do see some questions in the chat. I think there's not for me, so that's great. Okay, so now let's focus on student-teacher relationships. So looking at that model again, this is our focus now. So we looked at this. We were actually looking at teacher personality and how that can predict emotional well-being and academic achievement in students with specific learning disorders. In a recent paper, so what we saw in the literature is that because students spend a significant proportion of their lives in school, teachers are then those key figures in promoting well-being and academic achievement. And that relationship, teacher-student relationship, really mimics parent-child relationships. It involves care, teaching, discipline. So teachers can really become a secure base. So greater perceived teacher support, what the literature shows is that is associated with students' abilities to navigate academic challenges, greater student academic efficacy, and greater student academic achievement. So this was an empirical study, and I know this is a lot of information, and I will break it down to what we found. So actually, we looked at this at a school that serves only kids who are neurodiverse. In particular, they're bright students, so no intellectual disability, but usually they struggle with reading or math, so they have specific learning disability. But of course, many of them also have autism and ADHD co-occurring. And they were going through two social emotional learning curriculum, one that's mindfulness based and the other one that actually focuses on neurodiversity awareness, which is a Normal is in Real toolkit. So we did have those two groups, and we were interested in two outcomes, emotional well-being and academic achievement. So for emotional well-being, very interestingly, we found various teacher levels were important. So first, personality characteristics mattered. So teacher openness, conscientiousness, and actually neuroticism were associated with better student outcomes. So higher teacher openness predicted better academic achievement, including GPA. So what that suggests is more open teachers, those who are flexible, imaginative, and curious may be more likely to use adaptive and inclusive instructional strategies. So being open was very important for achievement, but not well-being. Conscientiousness was associated with emotional well-being, and conscientiousness is related to stronger organization, classroom management, and responsiveness to diverse learning needs. What was surprising is that moderate levels of neuroticism, so even though this was an important predictor in our sample, none of the teachers were in the extreme, but those who were moderate, not too low in neuroticism, actually had students with a higher well-being. So what we suggested is while neuroticism is often viewed negatively, This suggests that greater emotional sensitivity and awareness, which can support emotionally responsive and validating classroom environments, can actually support students' well-being. And we also saw that less years of experience, so like younger teachers actually had students with higher well-being, probably because they were also more open and more willing to listen. In this particular sample, we don't know if that would generalize. And females, so teachers who were females also had students with higher well-being. At the student level, girls had higher academic achievement. Baseline well-being also predicted later well-being, and being in the mindfulness group also predicted well-being for this particular group. Okay, so overall, the key takeaway from this work is that teacher characteristics are not neutral background factors, right? So each of you here, if you're a teacher, you mean a lot for your student, both their well-being and then in their academic achievement. And then one thing that really matters is for you to take care of yourself as well, right? So how you're going to show up, so taking care of your mental health, of your own needs, it's going to be very, very important. So how you show up in class. So don't think like, oh, I need to take time off, that you're not doing anything good for your students. Actually, you are doing you're doing something for them by doing something for you. So I think that's kind of a major implication of our findings. Okay, so moving forward to what can we do to include neurodiverse learners? We have a little other Slido. So let me go back. We are gonna start a new one, and we have a lot of new words here, thinking about outside the box emotion. And this can be a small open text. Should be working because I see some of you are typing. Yes, 15. Okay, be generally open-minded, provide variety of ways to demonstrate learning. Yes, we'll talk about universal design of learning. That's definitely very important. Provide training for teachers, making them feel they belong, open-minded engagement with students. A variety of ways of demonstrating learning. Yes, we will talk about that in a minute. Scaffolding, yes, for sure, working in that zone of proximal development, creating an environment where they are set up for success, yes. Focusing on their strengths, right? Or highlighting their strengths, not only their strengths, but strengths of each student in your classroom. Collaborative problem solving, yes, you guys are very sharp. I agree with all of that. Awesome. You can continue responding if you like. So again, we can think of environments as neurodiverse positive or neurodiverse negative. So, and with the same brain variations, and differences in thinking and acting, we can have very different outcomes depending on the context, right? We can have a neurodiverse negative context or positive. So here we can have an arc of failure, which we don't want, right? In neurodiverse negative settings, students may experience repeated failure, stigma, fixed mindsets, stress, anxiety, and depression. That can lead to learned helplessness and failing. But in a neurodiverse positive setting, students may feel accepted, valued. They will discover their strengths, develop self-advocacy, receive mentorship, and build resilience, leading to thriving and gaining a sense of agency. So that's what we can do. So some strategies, as you already mentioned, focusing on accessibility. So if you look at this picture, maybe you've seen this before, you probably notice a lot of differences, right? In the first scenario, each child gets exactly the same support. The second scenario demonstrates how each child gets what they need to access the ball game. The third scenario, though, presents that thought-provoking concept. Why don't we make things accessible for all from the beginning? So this is the base of universal design of learning. So UDL diminishes barriers and amplifies learning for all students. So really think about that case study we talked about in the beginning of class, like how could you implement something like this to the whole class to support all students, including this one. So for example, when I'm teaching undergrad students, I sometimes teach students that have accommodations, right? They have disabilities and they, for example, require access to slides ahead of time. They require me to record lectures so they can study for the exam. So what do? I make that as a standard for all students in my class. So that's always available for all students. So this is one example. So universal design of learning, it's a great evidence-based model. I highly encourage you to go explore their website. It's just so good. And they've been working on it and it's updating every time I look again. So you can look at cast.org. So this is a proactive research-based framework to optimize learning for all learning, teaching for all learners, learning for all learners is great, by reducing barriers in curriculum. So it focuses on providing multiple flexible methods for engagement, representation, and action expression, aiming to create those expert learners. So you can even join their community and they're looking at how to kind of use AI to build community. But the goal that they have is to alter learning environment and curriculum from the start, rather than retrofitting accommodations later. So how we can do this? We can do this from multiple means of engagement, capturing interest, sustaining effort, and motivating learners. So in other words, multiple ways to motivate learners, multiple ways to present information. So presenting information in various formats and allowing students to demonstrate knowledge in various ways. Writing, video, oral presentation. So you all mentioned a lot of that in your responses. So I'm sure you cannot see this very well, so I will break it down, but I really like this infographic they have at CAST UDL. And it shows that it's really grounded in neuroscience. So you see here each of the brain networks that are more engaged. But again, this is not a one brain region per principal way. But they, in their updated version, they really emphasize that network interaction rather than localization. And I will talk about each of them in a second. But engagement will engage networks for motivation, representation networks for perception and meaning, and action and expression for planning and expression. And they all interact dynamically during learning. And then executive functioning is going to cut across all the three networks. Language is going to be both representational and expressive, and motivation is also going to be influencing perception and action, not only engagement. So here are some examples of engagement. So welcoming interest and identity. So what are they very interested in, right? Nurturing joy and play. And what type of support? Clarity, clarify the meaning and purpose of the goals, optimizing challenge and support, fostering belonging and community. We talked a lot about all of these. So UDL talks about this as the why of learning, which primarily engages motivation, affect, and relevance and persistence. So for example, involving the limbic system, the amygdala, hippocampus, the reward network, orbitofrontal cortex, so value, relevance, and emotion decision integration. In representation, this is an executive functioning example. We have the what of learning, right? So what are you learning? So you can connect prior knowledge to the new learning. I'm sure all of you do that. Highlighting and explore patterns, big ideas, maximizing generalization. So this involves more of the visual processing, auditory processing, spatial processing, integration in the brain. And then the how do we learn? So it's the action and expression involving a lot of planning, execution, communication, and self-regulation. So that's going to use areas of the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, such as planning or working memory, monitoring, coordination, automatization. Okay, so I know I'm short on time, but this is my last question for all of you, and I'm very close to being done. So we regularly celebrate diversity in educational settings. Have you ever celebrated the neurodiversity in an educational setting? If so, how? So I will let you all respond, and here are just some ways we can do that. There are so many documentaries out there, so many great movies that you can use, and I'm sure you guys will have amazing other ideas for us to discuss. And then this is my last slide. I really want you to be thinking, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes to talk about this case study. So again, the student did not change, but our understanding of that student did. And the environment can also change. So what is the barrier the student has? What is their strength? And what is one change you can make today or starting next week to support that student? These are the acknowledgements. Of course, all the research assistants in my lab for their hard work, and participants of all the studies I presented, including the hard work of teachers. So the study I presented, teachers responded to a lot of surveys, a lot of questionnaires for us. So really hard work. Thank you for all of them. And then this is my contact information, and I'm always happy to connect. Let me go back and see everybody's response, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much. Big claps from everyone. I use the reaction button. They have a clapping one that floats now. So
Yes, I'm seeing them.
yeah, so we have a few minutes for questions. Of course, if you're part of 4-H and you'd like to join our focus group conversation, we'll have some information in the chat. So we have a couple of questions coming in. Caroline, I'm trying to make sure folks can see it. So Sophia says, thank you for the lecture. She was wondering, do the teacher's level traits apply to things like ABA therapy? I worked at as an RBT over the summer for kids with ASD, and I was not aware that it was a controversial form of therapy, and I want to be well informed of anything I can do to be a better part of the kids' treatment.
Yes, thank you for your question. Our study was not looking at ABA therapy and registered behavior technician necessarily, but what the literature suggests, yes, your traits, right, or how you show up to your students will definitely matter across all your interactions with them. Yes, ABA is controversial. In particular, there's a lot of self-advocates now coming out of decades of ABA therapy saying that many times that neurodiverse informed care was not present because what mattered for them was not being emphasized in therapy, and many times it could be really traumatic experience. But ABA therapy has been very responsive, and it's still a very evidence-based, and it works. It's very positive if done in a naturalistic way, and also informed by the needs of that particular individual. Even if the individual is nonverbal, there are ways that ABA therapy now can assess if they like something or dislike, and what works best for them, and not only their family, right? Because their family might have a different focus, but how about that particular individual, giving them voice in the therapy and giving them autonomy in choices, in decision making. So definitely ABA therapy is still very, very good. Uh, and it's being rapidly adapting to those new feedback from self-advocates that are now adults. But you would see different kind of practices or different type of trainings. So I definitely seen and worked with amazing ABA therapists that are very much in this naturalistic framework now.
Wow, that's really good uh like context for that, because I have definitely heard back and forth about ABA therapy and
Yeah, and of course, you're still gonna see some more traditional
yeah.
formats,
Yeah, of
unfortunately.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but there is a new, actually, I had a student that wrote a paper in class that was so good. There is a new natural, I forgot the name exactly, but it's like naturalistic
Hmm.
ABA, but there is a name that I forgot. Um, but it really focuses on both developmental psychology. So it's informed by developmental psychology,
Yeah.
informed by kind of the neurodiversity paradigm and ABA, because those principles are very important. It's just how you apply them.
Yeah. And informed by, I think this is the sort of like community neuroscience thing of like it's informed by the people, right, who have gone through this, who like
Mhm.
they have ideas, they have thoughts,
Mhm.
right? We got a few more questions coming in. What does research suggest are helpful behaviors that peers can utilize to create welcoming and supportive environments for neurodiverse learners? Interesting question.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, for sure. So I think, being a good friend, this student was a great example. So she was really passionate about talking about the strengths of her friends. She has multiple friends that are neurodiverse, and she was talking about them with so much care and really highlighting their strengths, right? So saying like, she had a whole slide that I didn't bring, that she
Mhm.
said, they actually are very good friends. They listen very carefully to my concerns. They are very serious and respectful. They're also very blunt and direct. So if I need an opinion, I really go to them.
That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, so like really being a good friend, right? And at the same time, if they love something, if they have a restricted interest, this student also was saying like, I wish I had one, but I love to hear all about this particular interest of my friend that she can go on, and I really get interested in that, right? Even, of course, you don't need to only be talking about that particular hyper focus, but being interested in it, uh, and really like just being a good friend, as you would be to any other peers, right? Just being respectful, um, and treating them well as you would like to be treated, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm conscious of time, so I'll do one more question here. So, Yuvna says, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how the rise of tech tools is impacting neurodivergent students. Do you think it might create more barriers for neurodivergent students?
That's an excellent question. We do have actually a few studies in my lab that we are using technology. One is virtual reality, social emotional learning intervention
Mm,
that we're using with neurodiverse learners to support their emotional regulation skills. And we actually think can be very helpful. And we are testing another game. It's a video game based um, intervention that focuses on attention. So really fosters attention and using kind of a mindfulness environment or a mindful environment. And that's for kids with reading disorders. And it can be actually, we do have some pilot results showing that it really improved their attention and can have impact or generalize to their reading fluency. But all of that to say, it can definitely go both ways, but actually, my next slide can be helpful. So this podcast for PEGS is hosted by a colleague who is a professor, and he's also neurodiverse at engineering at the University of Connecticut. And he put this podcast together, and he talks a lot about AI and kind of ChatGPT. And it was at the beginning, maybe it's been a year, oh gosh, just a year ago, that he talks about using that to really support neurodiverse students and how he uses. Yeah, and he talks openly about that. He has ADHD. So, how you can really teach students on looking at that blank page and starting a brainstorming conversation, right? Because kids who struggle with executive functioning, they really struggle with initiating. So AI tools can really help them initiate, right? Or help them keep on track. And he talks about that and kind of how that particular tool can actually be very supportive. So I do think it can actually be really good and help us be more individualized in our interventions. But of course, it could go both ways. I hope that's helpful.
It sounds like that's a theme. Same thing with the ABA therapies. It's like
Ex-
not the tool, but how you do it and how you're meeting, the student, the youth, where they're at. So really, like asking the question, is this helping? Right? Not just assuming that it does or it doesn't, but rather being
Yeah,
curious about it and saying, is this helping? Especially for this particular person at this particular time. Um,
exactly. And giving
yeah.
them voice and choice.
Yes, voice and we will end on that. That's right. Give people voice and choice. I love that. That's what, democratizing is. um, Thank you so much once again. If everyone could just give a warm send off to Caroline, Dr. Richter. That was once again amazing, humanizing, detailed scientific talk. We truly appreciate you. For those folks from 4-H who would like to join us in our focus group, Lena is going to have the link in the